I hesitated before bringing this story to you, but if you can't report on this when it's clear experts making this proclamation, then you can never report on it. So, I mean, this video will probably be demonetized and, could be viewed as promotion of an extremist position or whatever, but I got to tell you the truth. So anyway, this is surprising. This is a bombshell from the former CDC head. He goes on CNN, the most establishment of every outlet, to say something shocking about the origins of COVID-19.
If I was to guess, this virus started transmitting somewhere in September, October in Wuhan.
September, October.
That's my own view. It's an only opinion. I'm allowed to have opinions now. I am of the point of view that I still think the most likely etiology of this pathogen in Wuhan was from a laboratory, escaped. Other people don't believe that. That's fine. Science will eventually figure it out. It's not unusual for respiratory pathogens that are being worked on in a laboratory to infect a laboratory worker.
It is also not unusual for that type of research to be occurring in Wuhan. The city is a widely known center for viral studies in China, including the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which has experimented extensively with bat coronaviruses.
It is a remarkable conversation I feel like we're having here, because you are the former CDC director and you were the director at the time this was all happening.
For the first time, the former CDC director is stating publicly that he believes this pandemic started months earlier than we knew, and that it originated not at a wet market, but inside a lab in China.
These are two significant things to say, Dr. Redfield.
And that's not implying any intentionality. It's my opinion, right? But I am a virologist. I have spent my life in virology. I do not believe this somehow came from a bat to a human, and at that moment in time, the virus that came to the human became one of the most infectious viruses that we know in humanity for human-to-human transmission. Normally when a pathogen goes from a zoonotic to human, it takes a while for it to figure out how to become more and more efficient in human-to-human transmission. I just don't think this makes biological sense.
So in the lab, do you think that process of becoming more efficient was happening? Is that what you were suggesting?
Yeah, let's just say I have coronavirus that I'm working on. Most of us in the lab, we're trying to grow a virus. We try to help make it grow better and better and better and better and better and better so we can do experiments and figure out about it. That's the way I put it together.
It's a pretty extraordinary conversation and a little glimpse of what we revealed sort of within these couple of hours. I should point out the World Health Organization calls the lab leak theory unlikely, and Chinese officials have started increasingly pointing to a multiple origin theory, saying that this pandemic may have started in multiple places, even around the world, including U.S. military labs. That's unsubstantiated, but that's sort of the back and forth that's happening right now. We still don't know, a year later, exactly how this pandemic started.
Sanjay, he's the former CDC director. So when he says it's just his opinion, it's not just an opinion. The former CDC director sees things and knows things that the rest of us don't see.
Expertise.
Or no. Well, but not only his lifelong area of expertise, but actually when he was in the U.S. government, seeing things that the rest of us aren't entitled to. I mean, how much of just an opinion can it be?
That's exactly right. I mean, he's talking to people on the ground, not just his counterparts at the China CDC, but we have investigators on the ground in various countries around the world, including China. If you look even at our preparedness and response sort of strategies in the United States, it's medical and public health, but it's also intelligence gathering. So when we're sitting down and talking to all these people, we're getting a sort of overall picture, I think, for the first time of what they knew at what time, and how they were sort of piecing that together. So it's not just intrigue. I mean, it's important to know how this started if you're going to best prepare for a possible future pandemic. To go and it's sort of from an animal to a human and suddenly become one of the most infectious pathogens we've ever seen in humanity simply doesn't happen very often. That's the point that Dr. Redfield was trying to make.
I'm not an expert in this by any stretch of the imagination. So whatever commentary I give on this, you have to put an asterisk by it and say, this is a regular Joe Schmo moron. I'm admittedly a moron. So I just want to make that clear. Having said that, this segment convinced me. This segment convinced me. To the point where I'm like 80% on the side of, nah, this came from the lab. For a number of reasons. So, first of all, he says his opinion is that it started in September or October, which is earlier than what we previously heard. And then he says, in Wuhan, there's a virology lab in Wuhan. And then they go on to say, this is where I pounded the gavel. They go on to say, they study bat coronaviruses at that lab. Well, why are we being silly? Why are we being ridiculous? Like, obviously that's the most likely scenario that it came from there. Duh! Hey, there's a bat coronavirus that's now taking over the world. Where did this come from? I don't know. Have you checked Bat Coronavirus Central? Like, that's really the conversation that we're having. And then I really pounded the gavel when they say that, and I've heard this before, but COVID-19 is like 3 or 4 times more contagious than the flu. So the flu is very contagious. It's viewed as very contagious. But this is like 3 or 4 times more contagious than the flu. I mean, are we really having the conversation still? Are we really having the conversation? Now, I do want to caution a little bit here, though, because I don't think they did it on purpose. Like, I don't think that the Chinese government was like, mwahaha, let's release a virus and a pathogen that takes over the world, mwahaha. And the reason I say that is because there were plenty of people in China who got this virus too and died in China and got all around the world. There's no incentive, there's no motive for them to do that. I think it was just an accident. But having said that, what exactly are we doing with this study? Like, what's the point of studying the bat coronaviruses? Now, if you tell me the reason we're doing it is to try to come up with cures for other coronaviruses, okay, I got it. That makes sense, I guess. Are there other ways to maybe study it where you can try to come up with cures that don't involve maybe risking a potential global pandemic that kills probably over 1 million people? Probably, right? Like, again, I'm not an expert, so take whatever I say with a grain of salt, but like, what is the point of doing the studies on this stuff? What's the point? And it strikes me as like, this popped in my mind as I was watching that clip. Human beings are intelligent idiots. That's what we are. Like, we're smart enough to come up with the technology to create vaccines, to mass produce antibiotics. We're smart enough to get to the moon and to fly across the world. We have planes. It's so commonplace. Nobody even thinks twice about the fact that you get into a metal tube and can fly across the world, So we're smart enough to do shit like that. But we're also dumb enough to, like, create nuclear weapons, which, the U.S. dropped it on Hiroshima and Nagasaki and, like, just obliterated civilian populations. Just brutal murder, right? But, like, at this point, with the technology we have now, if there ever is another nuclear war, that's it. It's over. Game, set, match on humanity, son. So, like, why would you even create that kind of technology? There's no intelligent functional purpose for it. You can make some stretch of an argument about game theory, and so it keeps stability because everybody's armed to the teeth. Maybe. It's also possible that it could destroy the world, and maybe it will eventually destroy the world. And we created the tools of our own demise. That's also possible. So I think we're intelligent idiots. And this is an instance of, like, we have this lab where it's like high-level study of viruses and bat coronaviruses or whatever, and then it's like, whoopsies, infected the whole planet, tee-hee-hee. I'm not sure that it's the best idea to play with fire like this, But I say that, but then again, maybe it's in human nature. Maybe it's just part of who we are. Maybe this is just, it's something that's inextricable from our being, is that we always push the limits. We're cowboys on the frontier, and we're always pushing limits. We're always trying new things. We're always expanding. I mean, maybe that is the case, but, all I can say is I look at what happened here. I'm now convinced it came from the lab. I do think it was an accident. I don't think it was on purpose, but it makes me go, why were they even doing that in the first place? I don't, and maybe somebody can explain it to me in a way that I go, okay, I see, you had to do it, but Doesn't look like you had to play with fire. Doesn't look like you had to play with these bat coronaviruses and lead to a global pandemic. And the final point is, I think it's hilarious that China was like, oh yeah, maybe it came from a U.S. military lab. Come on, son. Literally nobody on planet Earth is harsher on the military industrial complex than me. I don't need to flex my credentials on that shit. I talk about it like every day on this show, okay? But that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. It's like, I know what you are, but what am I? That's what they just did. It came from Wuhan in a virology lab, and they're like, yeah, maybe it came from a military base in Missouri. Maybe that happened. Come on, man. Just own the shit. Just own it. Like, there's plenty of legitimate criticisms of the U.S. government and the U.S. military. You don't need to say some dumb shit. Like, maybe it's you. It's ridiculous. Anyway, there you have it, man. And again, this is on CNN, the most establishment of all outlets. And they're admitting this. Although, you know, this is totally conspiratorial, and I don't believe this, but I'm going to float it anyway. Some might argue that the reason why they're allowing this on CNN is that this is actually the narrative that the U.S. government wants you to know. They want you to actually blame the Chinese government because that, you know, we're sort of ramping up in this new Cold War where they're our main adversary, and so they want to use this to maybe beef up our own military budgets. So that's conspiratorial, and I don't really buy that, but it is true that there is increasingly anti-China sentiment in the media. Some of it legitimate, some of it not. But I'm giving that perspective as well. Some people would probably make that argument, but there you go. I mean, former CDC head saying, I think it came from a virology lab in Wuhan. That's a huge deal.